Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Can I just introduce myself? I'm James Bodie, CEO of Tenet Research, and today for this presentation, I'm double billing with a face that most of you will know, I guess, the indomitable Peter Gradwell, who is reborn again in his new role as the Chief Commercial Officer of Telet Research. And this morning, we're going to be talking about something which is hugely exciting and very topical, and that is, as Merrick said, building your own private 5G network, i.e. one that's not operated by the big mobile networks. This is something that wasn't possible until, well, about 18 months ago, but we'll tell you all about that. So without any further ado, let's hand over to Peter for the first segment. All yours,
Hello.
Peter.
Thank you, James. It's nice to meet you all, as James said. My background is in voice over IP and cloud communications, but I've moved on to mobile and got involved in Telet. So, and what is Telet doing? We're doing three things, trying to solve three problems. The first is not spot mobile coverage. We're deploying improved mobile coverage via small cells using an innovative roaming solution. James lives in a very beautiful valley near Sailsbury, but has no mobile phone coverage and no big towers. And he kind of had the idea that if he put a small cell on his chimney, then he would be able to improve his mobile coverage. And we've built this service. We're building a service called multi-operator neutral host, and that allows customers on any mobile network to roam in via local roaming. And I'll talk about that a lot more in a second. Secondly, we're doing some interesting stuff with private 5G. There's all sorts of interesting use cases with private 5G, but lots of people struggle to get 5G radios and software working together. So we work as a systems integrator there. And then we're doing, because of all our network experience, we're doing 5G fixed wireless access, working kind of wholesale in conjunction with wireless ISPs, where we provide the core and they provide the mast and the power and the backhaul. And using 5G and the kind of new 5G spectrum N77 to provide people with super fast fixed wireless. So Telet is the 5th UK mobile network operator in the UK. It's a full member of the GSMA. That means it's got customers, spectrum, radio mast, and a mobile phone network. It's been enabled because in 2019, Ofcom changed the spectrum rules that allowed new operators, and they did two things. First of all, they made some shared spectrum available in bands 338 and N77, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And secondly, they created a local licensing regime whereby you can apply to the existing operators through Ofcom to use some of the spectrum that they have previously won in auction or been granted to them. And we're proud to say that we've got the most number, I think 3 now, local licenses, which is sort of basically all the local licenses. And then the other thing we've got is some mobile numbering and a mobile network code and a network core. And this status kind of puts us on the same footing. We are obviously a very small operator, but it does provide good equivalence and it does open the door to working with the big operators. So I wanted to talk to you about coverage in the UK, and I'm sure that everyone in the audience has had a problem at some point with mobile coverage, and huge strides are being put into improving mobile coverage in the UK. You will be aware of the big £1 billion commitments by the government in things like shared rural network, the £500 million rollout of the emergency services network by EE. But the UK still has many not spots, and even in areas that are claimed to be covered, you often find that there are problems with not enough coverage or not enough signal. And one of the challenges with these big headline projects is they're very focused on rural areas that have not much coverage at all. Now, I live in the city centre of Bath, and we have lots of not spots in Bath. We have not spots in London. So, and one of the reasons for this is that our country has many beautiful dips and valleys in it, which radio doesn't propagate through very nicely. So you end up with, although you think you've got coverage, you end up with coverage black spots, and dropping a small cell into those coverage black spots is a nice solution. It also works really well in areas of outstanding natural beauty where someone doesn't want a really big metal tower outside their house, but they could put a small cell on their roof. And the final thing is, and one of our challenges with some of these big MNO projects with things like SRN is they're very focused on single operator deployment. So you can put up a big tower in Scotland, that's fine, you'll improve coverage, but you'll only support 1 or 2 operators because it's a requirement on the operators to put their equipment on the masts, and it's not cost effective for them to do that. There's not enough customers to do that. So we will end up with at least 1 operator covering the whole country, but that's not much help for all the people that are not on that operator. And so Monet is a solution where we put up 1 bit of equipment and we allow everyone to roam into that. And as I was saying, there is, a real big challenge. Actually, USwitch did a poll the other day that said half the country has a problem with, half the population has a problem with indoor coverage, but Ofcom's own figures think there's kind of 1.7 million houses with 1 or no providers. There's 80,000 houses with no signal, and so we've done some not spot mapping, and obviously, as you would expect, the kind of outlying areas in Scotland and Wales are the most challenged, but there's huge amounts of challenge in kind of places where there's still only 1 or 0 operators in places in the UK which are fairly well populated. And as I said, if you zoom in, this is a bit of North Yorkshire which we're working on, then you find that there's plenty of, even though there's masts for some operators, you'll still find there's plenty of not spots. So the Telet network deployment is currently working across 5 sites. You've got obviously Sailsbury, you've got North Yorkshire, we're looking at a site in South Wales, we've got one in Preston Bisset, which is just north of Oxford. And what we do is we're looking very much at kind of the last 5% of not spots and a cost-effective and sensitive deployment of these small cells. The initial rollout is funded by the DCMS Rural Connected Communities programme and the 5G Create programme. And then we're working on kind of additional sites for this year and for next year. And it's much more cost effective to do this. A big tower deployment, if you look at the mobile infill programme or the Scottish infill programme, they were working on kind of £4,000 or £5,000 a house to cover a house. If you look at deploying a small cell, your cost of coverage is more like £1,000 a house. So the final thing is roaming and national roaming. National roaming is something that's very unpopular in this country. Obviously, if you've got all the big operators and they all started to share their networks, that would lead to poor service for them. Network differentiation is a key selling point for the mobile operators. And so national roaming would be very difficult to implement in this country. And as a result of that, when Sajid Javid was trying to roll out improved mobile coverage back in 2014, the MNOs ultimately accepted a set of coverage obligations instead of national roaming. And those coverage obligations have now morphed into the commitments they made in the shared rural network. And so we're not talking about national roaming here. We're talking about local roaming, which only operates, and our network only operates in a region where there is no coverage from anyone else. So it's not a threat to anyone, it's always an improvement. And the other issue is it's neutral. The Telet network works for all networks, both the UK ones and the international ones. So we're not competing with anyone, we're not stealing their customers as a 5th operator. And because it's neutral, it fulfills a lot more grant funding criteria. So DCMS can be persuaded to help us roll this out in kind of challenging areas. And also, then finally, it's commercially viable. Not only is it a quarter of the price to deploy a cell, we're running all operators on one set of infrastructure. And so, so we can give coverage to all customers much more cost effectively, which works much better when you're trying to kind of fill in all these small villages and small places. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to James, and James is going to talk us through the challenges we faced and how we fit it.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And am I going to pop up on the video feed?
You're there.
I'm there. Okay. So let's talk about some of the technicalities of how we build the network. 5G networks are not all the same. And one of the biggest divides in the kind of 5G network world is between those networks that are 5G non-standalone or NSA and 5G standalone. So non-standalone networks are where you deploy a 4G core, an existing 4G core, which utilizes diameter signaling with a 4G anchor channel, and then to do the heavy lifting. You then aggregate in additional 5G secondary channels. And all of the current live MNO 5G deployments utilize NSA, non-standalone. The reason for that is they just do not have currently 5G cores. Standalone is where a network is deployed with a full 5G core. That utilizes HTML2 signaling in place of the diameter signaling, which is used in 4G. At the moment, if you want to run multi-operator neutral host, you cannot do that with standalone. It has to be done with a non-standalone deployment, simply because the mobile network operators, the Vodafones, O2s, EEs of this world, do not have a 5G core to interconnect to you. So that is a constraint. At the moment, we are deploying both NSA and SA deployments, but in different scenarios. To do that, we're using a mixture of both commercial and open source software within our core, and we have a range of different radios on the edge: Nokia Cable Free, Airspan, Benatel, Acceleran, and others in the pipeline as well. So, next one, Peter. Let's talk a little bit about spectrum. Ofcom opening up spectrum is the single big enabler that has allowed us to do what we're doing now. There are two forms of licensing. Taking the right-hand one first, shared licensing. Ofcom have made available 4 spectrum bands, even though it's on this slide, we're only listing 3. The 4 bands are 1800 megahertz, that's band 3. Great band, because just about every device on the planet supports band 3. So it's a really, really good band to have available. The drawback with this one is that it's a narrow band, only 3.3 megahertz wide. So you can't do any heavy lifting in that, but it's incredibly useful as an anchor band for a non-standalone deployment. So that's it's very we're using band 3 incredibly widely. The other 2 bands, we've got 10 megahertz at the top of band 40. That's a 23 megahertz. Sorry, 2.3 gigahertz or 2300 megahertz band. That's useful, but not as useful as the 3rd band, which is N77. That's 3.8, 4.2 gigahertz. That's above the current main 5G band, which runs up to 3.8 gigahertz. And the great thing about it is that there are very large amounts of spectrum available there. Therefore, making it ideal for heavy lifting, for where you want to achieve very high throughputs. The 4th band, not listed on here, is a millimetric band up at 24, 26 gigahertz. At present, nobody has applied for or been granted one of those licenses, mainly because there are very few devices that actually support that band. In terms of supporting devices, band 3, 1800, and band 40 are widely available today. Band N77 for 5G is appearing in all of the new devices. So iPhone 12, for example, has support for N77. So that's shared licensing. In addition to that, we also have access to local licensing, which allows operators like Telet to apply for any of the primary mobile bands that are not in use. So it's worth pointing out that the mobile network operators do not own the spectrum. They have been granted a license to commercially use the spectrum by Ofcom, but they don't own it. And Ofcom retains the right to issue a secondary license to other parties, particularly in a scenario where the spectrum is not being used. Clearly, in a mobile hotspot, spectrum is not being used, because if it was, you would have service. The main difference between another big difference between local licensing and shared licensing is that the local license comes with a minimum duration of 3 years up to a maximum of 10 years. So from a commercial perspective, it's a much better bet when rolling out infrastructure. However, it is more difficult to get, because you have to go off and liaise with the primary license holder, the mobile network operators, and that can be a bit of a drawn out and difficult process. At the moment, I think Peter mentioned it, we have more local access licenses than the rest of the UK put together, but that's only as a result of a lot of hard work and effort, and getting knocked back by the MNOs on a number of occasions. So local licensing, even though commercially it's much better, it's more difficult to get. Okay, so that's local licensing and shared licensing. Let's have a look at the next one, Peter. Okay, there are other key challenges that we have to deal with. These are the four main ones. The first one being regulatory. It's still not easy to get your hands on the bits and pieces that you need to run a mobile network. So principally mobile network codes, which also equate to IMSI ranges. So they're the identities that you put in your SIM cards. Without those, you can't run a mobile network. And it's worth pointing out that Ofcom have not issued any new mobile network codes in the last 2 years. They are very, very difficult to get. Also, the mobile number ranges that you need to operate the network. Moving on, going right, SIMs. SIMs are essential if you're going to be running a mobile network, but they are difficult to get your hands on, particularly in small quantities. So typical SIM manufacturers will start in quantities of 10,000 SIMs. So if you're a small network operator and you want 100, then you've got absolutely no chance. And also, they are incredibly complicated little things. They are complex to configure, particularly if you want multiple profiles. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Moving on, the GSMA. In order to operate a mobile network, you have to interact with the other mobile network operators and exchange data and other technical details. And the only way of doing that practically is to become a full member of the GSM Association. That in turn gives you access to a lot of the key procedures, in particular something called IR21, AA14 and AA19. It's all about settlement. Up until very recently, it has just been impossible to achieve full operator network status. It took us about 3 years of continual hard work to get into the GSMA. And that in turn gives us access to the essential MNO information and procedures that you need to operate a mobile network. And lastly, traffic settlement. Whilst you may be able to get an interconnect and make it work, then getting paid for the traffic and doing the traffic settlement is another huge challenge. It is complicated and expensive, difficult to implement. And then looking forwards, for pure 5G SA modes, there will be a new rating and charging system called BCE, for which the standards have not fully formed. If you slip onto the next one, Peter. So the Tenet Research aimed to help in all of these areas. So firstly, in the regulatory area, we help with surveys, selection of the spectrum bands, and we put in the license applications for spectrum and manage those through. We also supply mobile network codes and numbering if required. For SIMs, we can supply small quantity batches of SIMs operating with pre-tested configurations. Our SIMs are multi-IMSI and multi-crypto. So normally, a normal SIM card will only ever have one IMSI and one set of crypto because it only ever has to authenticate back to one place, i.e. the home operator. Ours are capable of having multiple profiles and authenticating in multiple places. And then the icing on the cake, the over-the-air management and configuration. So we can send out SIM cards with a kind of boot profile in, which then allow the customer who buys these SIMs to reconfigure them dynamically once they're deployed using over-the-air rekeying over the network signaling channel. So that's a huge bonus. For the GSMA, we offer MVNO-like services, which take care of all the complex, difficult, nasty bits that are likely to trip people up. And then for the traffic settlement, we offer kind of interconnect as a service to give the all-important multi-operator neutral host functionality. And as Peter intimated earlier, being able to offer a neutral service is key in securing government funding further down the line. If you're offering a private kind of single user solution, you are unlikely to be able to secure government funding going forward. Okay, that's that one. What else? So we've put together a kind of a three-tier commercial model. So we're looking to partner with rural ISPs and wireless ISPs who own and operate backhaul. So people who've got the infrastructure already deployed in places where there is poor mobile coverage. We then come along and we then drop on in the 5G infrastructure, the radios, the back end, the roaming agreements to provide a service which then backhauls from each of a number of different islands of connectivity owned and operated by the rural ISPs and WISPs. And if we do this all efficiently, then UK government come in and provide financial support for deploying the network infrastructure. So the end result is that rural ISPs should now be able to deliver improved mobile coverage on an all network basis using 5G infrastructure. And the great thing about this is that everybody wins. The customers on the ground win because they get mobile coverage. The UK mobile network operators win because they get coverage for their customers without having to cough up a whole load of money, which they haven't got. to cover areas that are not commercially viable for them. And UK government wins because ultimately everybody gets coverage. From my perspective, there's only one coverage number that actually makes sense, and that is 100% coverage, not 95 or 98. So, in conclusion, there is a huge demand for improved mobile coverage, and that cannot be met solely by large operators and the current UK government initiatives, because there will always be not spots. So we've got to come up with a way of covering these not spots. And the geography of UK just dictates that there'll always be lots of little pockets of land to fill. And the best way of doing those is with small cells. And our strategy of delivering improved rural coverage, combined with a number of niche mobile operator services which sit alongside the multi-operator neutral host, I think offers a hugely positive and profitable contribution. So we're very, very interested in working with UKNOF members to expand our footprint. So if anybody wants to have a chat about that, we'd be delighted to talk to you. And I think, Peter, is that it? There we are. There's contact details there. And I think now is the time that we go into interactive question and answer session mode.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much, Peter. Yes, let me hand you to Portia, who will marshal the questions for you.
Thanks, Merrick. Thanks, James and Peter. We do have a number of questions. I will start with Steve. Thank you for your question. The question is, do you need to use Nokia, cable-free, etc. radio at POP, or could you use low-cost antenna with RF over fiber for backhaul, distance dependent, of course?
So the question is, are we tied to specific radio brands? The answer is no. The intent is to make the selection of radios reasonably independent. So you choose the specific radios that actually match the deployment scenario. I think part of the question was actually focusing on the backhaul, wasn't it?
It's just about splitting the CU and the DU, because you could put them, is it up to 10 kilometers apart?
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. So you can do that, but you have to be aware that if you do that, you need very high bandwidth bearer network between the CU and the DU.
So, yeah, we tend to work with an all-in-one solution that just plugs into an IP connection.
Yeah, as Peter says, our solution tries to engineer out that particular problem, because we use a combined radio head with baseband unit all in one unit. Something we didn't mention is also that we're utilizing software-defined radios, the latest generation of software-defined radios. The big advantage of that is that that allows us either to change waveforms dynamically, and possibly also run multiple waveforms concurrently on one radio head. I think that just about, yeah, hopefully that answers the question in a kind of roundabout way.
Thank you. The next question is from Nitin, and he asks, do you think the adoption of eSIM will ease the complexity associated with SIMs?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's worth pointing out here that the SIM is not the little white thing, in fact, looking a bit like that you stuff into a device. The SIM is actually the electronic stuff that's held within this, and there are various ways of deploying that. Certainly for future devices, and in particular IoT devices, I think we're going to see a lot more embedded eSIMs. Going back to the question, yeah, our OTA platform supports SIMs, deployment of SIMs, both in conventional UICCIDs, which are these things, and eSIMs as well.
Yeah, it's one thing just to quickly mention on eSIMs is it makes it better from the customer's experience or the user experience, because you can scan a QR code and you'll get your SIM, but it makes it more complicated from the SIM provider's point of view, because rather than just batch producing a bit of plastic and handing them out, you've now got to run a whole infrastructure that's got to be audited every year, and it becomes a SaaS service basically. So so it's actually more complicated to deliver. So I'm a massive fan of eSIM.
Oh, sorry about that. I forgot to inform you guys that there is a poll that should be running, just to notify Dinesh. Just for the audience, a poll will now be put up for you to rate the talk by James and Peter. Please note that this will be the only time that you have an opportunity to rate the talk. Apologies for that. I do have a few other questions for you, Peter and James. The next two are comments, and then we have a question that will be asked live. The next comment is from Steve. He says, Sailsbury Communication won a GSM lower power guard-band license and full GSMA membership in the 2000s.
Yes, they did. Good old Magnus.
But it's become part of BT now.
No, in fact, no, they were bought by, was it Alcatel Lebara, and then Magnus has gone to work for BT, who were one of the other DEC guard band license holders. But they never got round to applying to the GSMA for full GSMA membership. So if anything, we're kind of one step further than dear old Magnus. Yeah, where the UK mobile fraternity is small. Everybody knows everybody else. So hello Magnus, if you're watching. So okay, Peter, do you want to add to that at all, Peter? No.
I have a comment by Dave, who will also ask a question. He says, I was at EMF Camp 2018 when they had a temporary license and ran their own GSM network. With James' talk of local license and shared licenses, I was wondering if he thought temporary local installations were more or less likely.
I think that they are more likely. The difference between what we're doing and what was done at that event is that we're offering a public service, whereas that event was a private deployment, and there was no official interconnect with the outside world. But strangely enough, we know the individuals involved in that deployment. One of them is actually a member of our team. So I think the question is, are we going to see more temporary deployments? The answer is undoubtedly yes, because it is a lot easier to get access to spectrum. One thing I'll say about spectrum on test and development licenses, one of the big constraints is that you're not able to run any kind of commercial operation on that spectrum. Whereas with shared access and local access licenses, you are. So you can do the settlement piece at the back end and be paid for providing service. That's a difference.
Okay, thank you so much. We had a few more comments, however, we are out of time. So we will encourage any more questions to please be submitted through the Mattermost channel, or of course you can meet our speakers at the pins and packets.
Yeah, I think both Peter and I will be lurking around for the rest of today, so you can probably find us on Spatial Chat or one of the other channels. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.